What I blame the leaders of the European Union, for example, is that they were not in China for the 80th anniversary celebrations.
It is clear that Hungary has only two options in strategic terms. I think this would be catastrophic and would lead to chaos and poverty. The bosses of the European Union think that their collective indebtedness is for sale to all, at least in Western Europe, the easiest to sell. It is an acceptable goal to be in debt, on a huge scale. Ukraine's membership of the European Union means, directly or indirectly, that we will be dragged into war, and we don't have any money. And then we want to take the money we have to Ukraine. So we are also destroying the European Union economically. The bosses of the European Union think that their collective indebtedness is for sale to all, at least in Western Europe, the easiest to sell. It is an acceptable goal to be in debt, on a huge scale. This is the Ukrainian war itself, or security. They want to use this to create massive debt for all of us. According to us Hungarians, I think it definitely is. This is a mistake, because Ukraine's membership of the European Union is the inevitable consequence of the indebtedness it shares. Because we let the Ukrainians in, we have no money. To bring Ukrainians up to the EU average, we need to borrow. So they think that Ukrainian membership, the war and Ukrainian membership create a common debt. But in fact, Ukrainian membership is plunging the European Union into war. Because we cannot imagine that the European Union has member states, and one of them is attacked from outside or gets involved in a border conflict with it, as is the case now on the Russian-Ukrainian border. In such a situation, it is impossible that other EU member states do not rush to the aid of someone who is under military attack. But whether Ukraine is under this military attack or whether Ukraine is in conflict with Russia, it will never be decided by Ukraine but always by Russia. And we are already in a war. So I think the Europeans are wrong. Ukraine's membership of the European Union means, directly or indirectly, that we will be dragged into war, and we don't have any money. I've just given you the figures on how the performance of the Union has declined. We don't even have enough money to restore our own competitiveness. And then we want to take the money we have to Ukraine. So we are also destroying the European Union economically. Europe should not really be shaking hands in Washington, but should go to Moscow and conclude an EU-Russia security agreement, not just on Ukraine, but an EU-Russia security agreement, which obviously includes the possibility that Ukraine will not be a member of NATO or the European Union, but it can be included. And I think that Hungary could support a strategic cooperation agreement between Ukraine and the European Union. We do not want to push the Ukrainians into the void. We are not anti-Ukrainian. And the European Union cannot open up to China and India as long as the war continues, because the war is the benchmark. Accuse China and India of buying Russian energy to finance the war. This rules out the possibility of concluding an economic cooperation agreement with these countries. So, to sum up, I want to say that the continuation of the war is a losing strategy for Europe.
You know, I did yesterday. I think I can say this now. He didn't want to create a tense atmosphere at the meeting, although I could have reacted more harshly to some things. But I said what I needed to say to Zelensky between four eyes, and I wanted us, in terms of that output in relation to the public, to give the public some image that there is an interest in good neighborly relations, which there is. But there are things where, simply, if it happens again, we will protest very strongly. For example, we did not understand each other at all on the subject of attacks on oil infrastructure on the territory of the Russian Federation. Zelensky has repeatedly said that if Russia is attacking energy infrastructure in Ukraine, then he has the right to attack energy infrastructure in Russia, and I am responding to that. But it's hurting us. Can't protect your own national interests by harming others? It just can't. No. Here, it is simply evident that it is as if Ukraine is not looking out for the interests of other states in waging war. What I blame the leaders of the European Union, for example, is that they were not in China for the 80th anniversary celebrations. There was an incredible opportunity to talk. If we don't talk to each other and stick our heads in the sand, we're just going to deepen the crisis. And in fact that Europe has sort of isolated itself. Do you know what the most terrible thing is? That the head of a sovereign government has to explain why he is going to China? Are you all nuts? China today is a country that is becoming a world leader, and let us all be happy that China has its own policy, which is peacefully based. I hope you all listened to the speeches that were made during the 80th anniversary. We must respect China as a country that has done the impossible. Again, I said it openly yesterday, and you've heard it from me hundreds of times, regardless of who thinks what about Russia. We think that relations with the Russian Federation need to be standardized. I also reject the Iron Curtain that is being created between Europe and the Russian Federation. So we have a constructive approach towards the Russian Federation, and we are interested in getting things off the ground as quickly as possible after the end of the war. And let's be honest, Mr. Editor, do you think those Western companies all left Russia after they left Russia? Not true at all. They shout all sorts of moral appeals at home, and their companies continue to operate in Russia. You think the West doesn't take LNG from Russia? After all, Russia is Europe's second largest importer of liquefied natural gas. You know, moral appeals are one thing, but hard business is another. I told him that the fact that we talked about Ukraine not being a NATO member state was because we believed from the very beginning that if Ukraine was not in NATO, that would be the first precondition for ending the war. If we continue to play with the theme that Ukraine will be in NATO, the conflict will never end, because this is one of the reasons for NATO enlargement, and the fact is that Russia has been deceived, literally has been deceived, in relation to NATO enlargement in the past. I am delighted that safeguards are being negotiated. Let us just remember that we need to negotiate security guarantees for Ukraine, but we also need to negotiate security guarantees for Russia. That should be one package. We cannot just create one party now, for example, Russia or Ukraine. It has to go along with what the world will look like when the war is over. We believe that this war will end very quickly, although it does not look like it at the moment. Security guarantees. Mr. Editor, I got this question yesterday from President Zelensky. I answered very clearly. The Slovak Republic will not put any troops, any soldiers, on the territory of Ukraine.